Greetings class, Mr. Mills here, coming at you with an economic guide, because apparently we're going back to school, because even in video games, we gotta learn about goddamn economics. Now in this video, I'm gonna be breaking down everything that you need to do in every single round of the game as far as economy is concerned, what you should buy, when you should buy, and all your options as far as the different weapons you could use, what's gonna be the easiest to use to get you the most value, what the pros are using, and just everything that you could possibly need to dominate your ranked games every single time. But go to the GameLeap website in the links down below. We got that Stimmian, baby, and it's time to use it to climb the ladder with ease. Plus, maybe you'll have enough afterwards to get yourself one of those sick new graphics cards, who knows? But do yourself a favor, go check it out in the links down below so that you can start climbing right now. But without further ado, let's jump into the video. Now, the first thing that we gotta talk about, of course, is the first round of the game, which is that pistol round. And I'm gonna really break this up by attack and defense because there's gonna be some differentiating changes about pistol round. But generally, pistol round, there are only going to be two weapons that are mainly viable in the ghost pistol and the classic pistol. But there are gonna be some other slight options. I'm gonna talk about those in a second. Now, essentially, the big decision between a ghost and a classic has to do with how your economy of your character, the buys, line up with the cost of the weapons. Because you see that the ghost pistol is 500 and the classic is 400. So you could still do a close to ghost impression, something that is close to the same power level in a classic plus armor, but it's at 100 less cost, so you could fit a little bit more in there. So for instance, if you're a character like Raze, you want to buy two abilities, it's a lot better for you to get that classic pistol plus armor, still be pretty decent, and then still be able to buy a blast pack plus a boom bot, where other characters might not care that much, or their eco, the eco of that character fits a lot better, so they would much rather have that ghost pistol, and it's typically going to be different from character to character. Now that being said, some characters are not going to want to buy armor at all. They're just going to run and walk the classic plus all their abilities, and that's typically going to be more often on defense when these characters are heavy utility ability based characters. Characters like Sentinels, maybe like Killjoy, or a number of other characters that would much rather have their abilities to play off of and to use it to prevent a rush rather than have some sort of extra sustain. Now, with specifically the ghost pistol, you gotta make sure to abuse jumping and the fact that you can right click, jump, get a little bit of damage in from relative safety, and then finish them off with a wide swing right click while you're moving. That's incredibly powerful and a good strategy to play around cover on point when enemies are rushing into you. Force them to play closer because the ghost is going to be more effective from longer distance. And when you're using the ghost pistol, just make sure that you're spraying through smokes a lot more and you're trying to distance yourself from a lot of the other weapon options, mainly the frenzy and the classic. Now, speaking of the frenzy can still be viable in some scenarios, but it's really going to be only viable on a character that has some sort of mobility. You're not going to want to tack this on to something like a Sage, for instance. It would be far better to buy more utility or buy a ghost pistol for her. But maybe if you're a character like Raze or Jet, sometimes even Reyna, these type of characters can abuse the frenzy better than most. But still, it's going to be mainly up to personal preference, and honestly, you're probably going to have a better bet rocking that ghost for that same price point, or the classic plus armor. But maybe if you're holding defensively in something like Garage on Haven, it might be a gun that you know for a fact you can get a kill and get out with and stop a potential rush. Now, talking about that Sheriff, you rarely want to ever use the Sheriff if you can help it. Sheriff is not really going to be that good because you're using all your money. While it's amazing on other rounds up against better guns, using it on pistol round is just really inefficient. A lot of times it's overkill. It's not that effective at fighting up against guns that can move and shoot, which is all of them in pistol round. It's really not the gun you want to rock, and yeah, of course, maybe sometimes you see streamers rock it, but that's not really what you want to be doing, honestly. There's many better options that we already just talked about. Now let's talk about that second round, and I'm gonna do like a little branching tree, like an RPG branching tree. One scenario for if you lost that first pistol round, and one scenario for if you won. So if you lost, you have to ask yourself several questions. Are you gonna force, or are you gonna save? Typically, forcing is happening more and more in the meta, and in ranked, it's very powerful, but that doesn't mean you wanna force every time. It really depends on the overall team, what they wanna do. You really wanna go with the flow with the team. If the team generally wanna force, you wanna force with them, and if the team is saving, you wanna save with them. It's really important for you all to be on the same page, so your eco is not completely screwed for later down the line. Now, let's say you're gonna force, right? The next question is, what weapons are you gonna buy? And there's a lot of different options in that regard, but I'm gonna be breaking those at the end when I talk about eco weapon choices. But typically what you want to be thinking about is how you plan to play a force. If you are going to be forcing on defense, how do you plan to play it? Are you going to be playing aggressive, defensive, or if you're playing on attack, do you plan to rush? How do you plan to play it? Making a game plan ahead of time is going to better help you decide what weapons you want to force into if you lost that first pistol round. Now, let's say you're on that second round and you won. What do you typically want to do? Well, you gotta understand that the enemy team might force. In fact, it's pretty likely that they will. So you typically want to upgrade in a way that actually plays into them, even if they force, and you want to make sure to play around a potential force. So what do you got to be prepared for? Well, the first thing you want to buy is you want to buy full armor, and you want to buy a weapon that's good against multiple enemies, because rushes are more likely to happen. And even better yet, a weapon that is better from a little bit further distances. So while the enemy team is going to be buying things like Stingers, Buckies, or whatever, you're gonna be able to buy a Spectre plus full armor plus all your abilities, and you can play a lot further from the enemy, prepared for them to rush. You don't necessarily want to be holding your ground in that one round, especially if you're on defense, because the enemy team's gonna rush on. A lot of times it's either better for you to just play for retake or play really passive on the point so you could potentially get a kill and then get out. You're not committing to anything. With that being said, maybe you're playing Jet on defense and you want to buy an operator as quickly as possible. If your team is all buying and you're pretty confident that you could still hold your ground on defense because you have a defensive advantage, you have better weapons, then you can go pretty light. You don't always have to buy with your entire team if you have a game plan for that third round. But remember, if you try to save when the rest of your team buys and you're relying on them to win the round basically because they have all the guns and y'all lose that round, you're not going to make enough money to go all the way up to that operator that you wanted to. So that's the downside, that's the fear, and sometimes it can really come back to bite you, so definitely keep that in mind. Now the last round that we're gonna really talk about is that third round. Let's say you won that second round. So you won the pistol round, you won that second round, now you're in that third round. What you typically are going to want to do is bonus. You don't want to upgrade for no reason. You don't want to just burn your Spectres or whatever you bought, because that's just burning money, and you could still win a round with those weapons. So even if you lose that third round, if the enemy is buying rifles, that is fine because you don't want a bonus for no reason. It's just a waste of money. Now that being said, if some of your teammates have died and the enemy team did force on that second round when they lost that first pistol round, now the rest of you can actually upgrade to rifles, because then you're gonna have like 2 or 3 rifles, 2 or 3 potential Stingers or Spectres, and the enemy team is either going to force and they're not gonna be able to afford rifles because they forced in that second round, or they're gonna save, and either way your team is just gonna have better overall guns, and then you're gonna be better for that bonus round after you win this round. So that's just something that you should keep in mind. Now in that third round, let's say that you saved in the second round. You lost that first pistol round, you're saving in that second round, and now you have enough, you want to just buy rifles in that third round. Because if the enemy team is bonusing and they are rocking a lot of Spectres and Stingers or things like that, and because you didn't force in that second round, y'all really didn't get that many kills, so they have all these guns, you are going to be able to buy, and most of them are going to be actually saving or bonusing. So they're not going to have rifles. So you want to be playing at further effective ranges, taking duels that are advantaged for you, not rushing in because you're going to get killed by all these close range guns. And generally, as a rule of thumb, if you have far better weapons that are better effective range and just better overall than the enemy, you want to take your time and you don't want to rush. Spend time baiting out abilities. Spend time playing default, putting in damage, waiting for picks, waiting for enemies to make a mistake. You don't have to rush anything, because one rush into some utility and someone getting you from an angle that you're not clearing, that could be the end of it, and it doesn't even matter what weapon they're using. You can afford to take the time, turn the game into a battle of gunplay, not a battle of abilities, and try to make sure that you're spending more time than you normally would in default, and do not rush when you have rifles and the enemy team is bonusing. Now let's talk about the 3 big eco mistakes that are really holding you back and causing you to lose a lot of games that really you're better than the enemy and you should not be losing. The first one is force buying over and over again. Yeah, if you lost that first pistol round, I wouldn't fault you for force buying on that second round. A lot of times it's gonna work and it's very powerful to do, but doing it a second time after that, a third time, a fourth time, you are just digging yourself into a hole. You're basically leveraging your goddamn Robinhood account to buy GME stocks, and eventually you gotta pay that shit, right? Well, here, you're gonna be paying it with losing the entire game, because you're just going to put yourself in a bigger rut while the enemy team is building up more and more money. And even if some miracle, 3, 4, 5 rounds down the line, you manage to win a round, the enemy team are just going to be able to buy, and they might even buy operators, which is going to be very difficult for you to play around. They can just throw money into the wall and see what sticks. Now, generally, it's not by much, but it's important for you to understand, if you are planning on force buying a lot, like you're a team that wants to force buy, you have a lot of duelists, you want to force buy, you want to lurk up, you want to rush, whatever the case may be, it is more risky for you to force buy when the enemy team is on defense just because of operators. You got to understand that if you give the enemy a giant amount of money, if they're on attack, sometimes the most they're ever going to buy is just some rifles. And you could eventually, you win one round, you get rifles and you can challenge them, right? But if you're on attack and they're on defense and they get maxed money and they start buying a couple of operators, even when you get rifles, you could still be in a rut. And even if you kill them and take their operators, a lot of times you're not going to be able to utilize it as well as them. And if they have multiple operators, it can just make it really difficult for you to come back out of this rut. You've maybe went around, you feel like you finally come out of it, and then you just lose around to operators, and it could be a complete mess. So if the enemy team's on attack, force buying is typically going to be better because they can push into you and you can play deep angles and get a lot of value that way. But it's more risky to force buy a lot if the enemy team is on defense. So just keep that in mind. Now, the second big mistake that you need to understand is you should not be buying economically alone if you're not going to get value. Now, I know I said that typically you want to match all your eco buys with your team, but there are some exceptions. Sometimes it's okay to eco buy differently than your team if you think that you can get value to be the difference maker. Now, almost always, this is either going to be someone that's going to lurk or some sort of duelist or some person that can utilize even a decent gun into a gigantic advantage. One example of this is someone like Reyna, who if you just put her, you give her maybe a sheriff, right? And even if she's a little bit under that 2,000 credit threshold, so if she loses, she might not be able to buy a rifle or full armor, whatever the case may be. Not only does she operate better, even if she doesn't have the maximum amount of armor, she's a character that can actually convert one kill into multiple kills, and she has a higher chance of getting kills to make up the cost in any given round. Another example of this would be someone like Jett, who has her knives as an X factor, not only helping her for economic sake, but can help her clutch up a round that y'all are saving, or maybe she can use her knives in a round where everyone else buying rifles and she can't afford it. So it allows her to be a little bit greedier with the way she buys. Now, you individually are going to get a feel for when you could buy and how you could get value, but you got to understand that if you buy in a way that really messes with your ability to match your team's economy and you get no value, then you're going to be stuck in a scenario where you're going to have either no armor, or a bad gun when the rest of your team has a gun. And then you got to think about, hey, maybe if I would have had a rifle here, we would have run this round and we lost it because of me. So just be hard on yourself. Think about it. And if you see a moment where you could get value and you're confident, go for it. I'm not telling you not to, but just make sure that you understand the consequences for the future. Now, the last thing that we got to talk about is fighting in a way that maximizes your chances at succeeding with eco weapons. So real quickly, I'm going to go through all the eco weapon choices, what you should be using, what you should be not using, and in what scenario should you use each gun. So the first ones we got to talk about is the Spectre, Stinger, Bucky, and Judge. So Spectre, like I said, is a really decent, well-rounded gun. It's a gun that is not going to win the close range battle up against the Stinger, but it's far more versatile. It has a silencer so it can spam through smokes, and it's just an all-around decent weapon, but it's gonna be underperforming up against rifles unless you get the drop on them or you're just aiming a lot better. And from those closer ranges, it's gonna be a lot worse than something like a Stinger, even if it does have a much bigger magazine and it's way more versatile, like I said. Now, the Stinger is still a decent gun. After its nerf, it's not overpowered or anything like that, but if you get in close effective range with people, it still absolutely deletes them, and the only weapons that can delete you faster are shotguns. Now, speaking of shotguns, we got to talk about the Bucky. Bucky is a gun that's going to be far better on defense, and how you use the Bucky is you hold that angle from the 9 to 15 meters. You can ping it to see on the ground, and you alternate fire from that angle, and basically you're doing a short range op impression. You're holding an angle, enemies step on that angle, they're dead. You back off, you reverse slice the pipe backwards. If more enemies swing, you kill them too. Definitely put a little bit of practice into it. It takes a little bit getting used to, but the Bucky is an incredible weapon on eco. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if it's nerfed pretty soon, and especially if you put it in the hands of a character that has mobility like Jett, or a get out of jail card like Reyna. It can be freaking impossible to push into someone who's good with the Bucky. Now, the Judge is a weapon that is not very good typically. The one example where it's amazing is when you're really close to a corridor, you're holding it, and enemies rush into you multi-style. Because the Bucky and the Stinger, the two weaknesses of these close range weapons is they're limited in how many people they can kill in a row, right? The Bucky has downtime between its shots, the Stinger has limited ammo, but the Judge, 4 people rush into you and they don't clear you instantly and you have a Judge, you're gonna kill all 4. And if enemies are not disciplined in the way that they check their corners, the Judge can completely annihilate them, but it's only probably gonna work once. After the first time, they're never gonna let you wipe them again with the Judge. Now, the most versatile weapon is the Sheriff. Now, Sheriff is gonna be far worse up against people that are buying weapons that they intend to run and gun with. Things like Stingers and Buckies and Spectres, because Sheriff is better when enemies are playing slow, disciplined, and you can really utilize your crosshair placement to get those one-taps. So it's actually better against rifles than it is up against these SMG type weapons. Now, all in all, the Sheriff is one of those weapons that pro players are using a lot in order to clutch up rounds that they normally wouldn't be able to. But you gotta understand that Sheriff is like the pinnacle of mechanical skill. It's one of those weapons that you not only need to put a lot of practice into, but you need to have high mechanical skill in order to make it worth it a consistent amount of time. So it's a weapon that I would highly suggest practicing. And just because pros use it doesn't mean maybe in your silver games, you're gonna be able to pop off with it. But that doesn't mean not use it. I'm just saying other weapons are gonna be able to get value a lot easier with less skill. But if you learn to master the Sheriff, it can be one of the best weapons, especially using it as one of those difference maker guns, like I said. The potential for you to lurk up against enemies that have rifles, get 2 kills, get a gun and another gun for your teammate, and win a round that you would have lost normally is incredibly high on the Sheriff when you compare it to a lot of other weapons. The last eco weapon I gotta talk about is the Marshal, which is a weapon that can be amazing. I mean, I love all the changes that happen to the Marshal, but it really does require a very unique type of mechanical skill. Not only are you aiming for the head, but you're kind of moving very quickly, counter-strafing, you're Ferrari peeking people with the scope out. There's a lot that you need in order to make the Marshal work, and sometimes if you miss, you're just gonna get punished and die right there, or even if you hit the body, you're gonna die. So you gotta hit these headshots. Now, the Marshal's one of those guns that has the capability of completely turning rounds, even up against ops, even up against rifles. And for those reasons, it's an amazing gun to get good at, but it is incredibly difficult to use. So if you are planning on using the Marshal a lot, you definitely want to practice it a lot in deathmatch. Now, if you have any questions, definitely let me know in the comments down below, and go to the GameLeap website for high quality in-depth guides that you won't find anywhere else. We have in-depth agent courses, in-depth weapon guides, so much map guides. We got so much that you possibly need on the GameLeap website, so go check it out right now in the links down below. But thank you so much for coming by. I hope you enjoyed the video. I love your faces, and I'll see you tomorrow.